So, I found my least favourite book of the year and my favourite book of the year so far. May's been quite the month. Hello, welcome to The Book Thing. My name's Mark and this is the wrap up for everything that I read in May. Before I start, I just want to welcome all the new people who've subscribed. For reasons I don't properly understand, the YouTube algorithm decided to show my video of the 10 hardest books that I've read to a whole lot of people, and I've got a whole load of new subscribers as a result. Welcome. So this month I'm going to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to do my books in order from least favourite to favourite. Starting with my least favourite book of the month, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This book is No, okay, that's not true. This book is a classic, it has lots of merit to it, and it is objectively not Subjectively though, I hate this book. I'm not going to bang on about that one again. I did a whole video ranting about how much I didn't like Pride and Prejudice, and I'll leave a link to it on screen. I will say one thing though. If you thought I was hard on Jane Austen, you should hear what Mark Twain had to say about her. I found this quote and it said, "I haven't any right to criticise books, and I don't do it except when I hate them. I often want to criticise Jane Austen, but her books madden me so that I can't conceal my frenzy from the reader, and therefore have to stop every time I begin. Every time I read Pride and Prejudice, I want to dig her up and beat her over the skull with her own shin bone." That last sentence is probably apocryphal. He probably didn't say it. It's kind of funny if he did though, and if he did, Mr. Clements, it would have been my honour to carry your shovel. So next up was 3 books by David Baldacci, finishing off his Camel Club series. And those 3 were Stone Cold, Divine Justice, and Hell's Corner. So David Baldacci's Camel Club follows this character who refers to himself as Oliver Stone, and it's all to do with these big conspiracy theories in the heart of Washington. It's all very high concept, lots of implausible plots, but a lot of fun. These are the sort of books that you'd find in a shop in an airport, on a rack somewhere between the travel sick tablets and the inflatable neck pillows. Where you won't find them is on the Booker Prize shortlist. But that's absolutely fine. What I want out of them is something to distract me on audiobook when I'm doing some jobs around the house or commuting to work. I gave them all 3 stars. These are pretty much the definition of 3-star reads. They are fun, fairly disposable, something that I will probably have forgotten the plot of in 6 months' time. The most enjoyable, I'd say, was probably Stone Cold, and the least enjoyable was probably Hell's Corner, because it probably had the most implausible plot, which in a David Baldacci Camel Club book is quite a competitive field. Speaking of audiobooks, I also got through the first 4 parts of the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. And those books are All Systems Red, Artificial Condition, Rogue Protocol, and Exit Strategy. They're more novellas than books, really. They're quite short. It's a science fiction series set in a distant future where space has been colonized by all of these corporations, and it's told from the perspective of this security android who has managed to hack his own systems and disconnect himself and is able to follow his own free will now, but all he wants to do is watch soap operas and do his job as poorly as possible because he really doesn't care. It's kind of got the DNA of Marvin the android from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but he's an awful lot more nihilistic, and he refers to himself as Murderbot. This has had a lot of praise from sort of neurodiverse readers because the character of Murderbot seems to present an awful lot of traits of people on the autism spectrum. So he has very much routines around this entertainment that he likes to consume. He doesn't like physical contact. He doesn't like eye contact. He struggles to pick up on social cues, even though he can process an awful lot of information. And it's had a lot of praise from neurodiverse readers, apparently. I could see why. It's an awful lot of fun. Again, it's silly fun, but 4 stars for each of them. The one big criticism I have for this series is the titles of the books. The titles are just so aggressively generic that if you were to just mix up all of the words in the titles and then ask me to put them in order, I still wouldn't be any the wiser. I mean, with names like Artificial Condition and Rogue Protocol, they sound like the subtitles of Mission Impossible films. But aside from my difficulty in being able to differentiate between the different books, I actually had a really good time with this. So there's a couple of those books left and I'll be enjoying finishing them off. The next one is a bit of an odd one for me, and that is Flint by Louis L'Amour. Now, Louis L'Amour, if you've never heard of him, was kind of the granddaddy of the pulp western writers. He started writing books in about the 50s and he published something like 100, 150 novels by the time he'd finished writing in the late 80s. And it was mostly pulp westerns. And I wanted to give one of them a go. And it just so happens this month that Nikhil over at Esteem was reading it, so we did it as a buddy read and I had an awful lot of fun doing that. So Flint is the story of this character called Kettleman, who was an orphan in the Old West and was sort of taken in by this surrogate father figure called Flint, who is this sort of old gunfighter. Flint is killed and Kettleman goes off east and makes his fortune in New York. Years later, he has discovered that he's got terminal cancer and he travels back to the West, abandons the name Kettleman behind him, adopts the name Flint with the intention of living out his remaining weeks. So as you'd expect when a stranger arrives into town in the Old West, he arrives in the middle of all of this turmoil. And this one specifically is to do with the orphan owner of a ranch and this big landowner who's trying to take over vast quantities of land. So those sort of tropes are kind of what you'd expect. But what I didn't really expect with it is how it kind of subverted them a little bit, because when Kettleman, or as he's now known, Flint, arrives into town, he is, as well as being the strange gunfighter, he's also a big businessman himself. So the usual tactics that are deployed by the wealthy villain are actually something that Flint has at his disposal as well. This book was surprisingly good. I was expecting it to be all sort of big shootouts and fistfights and all of that sort of thing. And there is certainly some action in there, but actually it has more of this meditative pace. And actually the strongest chapters are late on in the book, where there's almost this cat and mouse between these two gunfighters out in the open countryside. And yeah, do you know something? It was a lot of fun doing the read along with Nikhil, and it was actually an awful lot of fun reading the book as well. This was a surprising 4.5-star read for me. Really enjoyed it, and I think I might actually read some more of Louis L'Amour's work. Next thing is Acceptance by Jeff VanderMeer, and this is the third part in his Southern Reach series. It was a trilogy until this year when he decided to release a fourth part. So the Southern Reach series is all about this part of America called Area X, where some sort of event has happened where this area has been enclosed off and strange and weird things happened there. The first book, Annihilation, was all about one of the expeditions that went into Area X and all of the expeditions that had happened beforehand. Either people had come back vastly changed or didn't come back at all. The second book is about the agency that is in charge of Area X, known as the Southern Reach. The third book, Acceptance, it's kind of difficult to talk about this without giving spoilers, but I'll do my best. There's essentially 3 different storylines going on at once. The first one is what's happening in the present, which is 2 characters from the end of Authority, which is the second part, and what happens to them in Area X. The second storyline is set just before the events of Annihilation, and it's from the perspective of one of the characters in the expedition, the psychologist. And then the third part is set many years before, and it is from the perspective of the lighthouse keeper that is in the area that Area X becomes. And this is all in the events leading up to the event which creates Area X. One of the things I like about this series is it doesn't really provide you any answers. A lot of the time when you're reading science fiction books, there is very detailed worlds that have been built and described to you. But in this series, it's left with an awful lot of ambiguity. You're never quite sure what Area X is, what the nature of the event that happens that creates it, or even what makes it so different from the area that's outside it. You start to get a few more answers in Acceptance, but quite frankly, some of those answers just lead to bigger and bigger questions. I really like this. The first book in this series was excellent. I wasn't quite so keen on the second book, but I think this third one was a real return to form, and it did a great job in building up more of the ambiguity and the atmosphere that we had in the first book. It really felt that with Acceptance, he had come to some sort of conclusion with the series, even though it was still all very ambiguous and up in the air. So it'll be really interesting to see what he brings to the table with this new fourth unexpected book, Absolution. So I'm looking forward to reading that one pretty soon. The next book I'm going to talk about is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This was another buddy read, and I did that with my friend John over at Disquiet and Dragons. Now, if you're not subscribed to John at Disquiet and Dragons, you absolutely should be. John has got a great channel. He mostly talks about horror and sci-fi, but when he does his conversations about books, he tends to do it while he's walking out in the Midlands countryside, and he does some beautiful videos, so absolutely check out John's channel. So Project Hail Mary is obviously a pretty well-known book. It was written by Andy Weir, who's the author of The Martian, which was made into the film by Ridley Scott and starring Matt Damon. But the story of Project Hail Mary it begins with an astronaut waking up on a ship alone with no idea how he got there or what he is doing there or even who he is. As he starts to remember bits and pieces, we get flashbacks along with him of his past, and it builds up this story about this existential crisis that is happening on Earth, which eventually leads to the details as to why this mission that he is on was created in the first place. And I kind of don't want to say any more than that, because I went into this pretty cold, and I think that's a pretty good way of going into this book. Suffice to say, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. Andy Weir generally is pretty good about doing things from a scientific perspective. What he does very well is he will take this weird assumption, in this case, this story of this potential existential threat and what the cause of it is, and then look through all of what the potential scientific implications of that would be. And it has all sorts of implications around how life evolves and various different bits and pieces like that. This was a 5-star read for me. It's not particularly deep, but it is so much fun. It is so satisfying to read, and it is a very easy one to recommend to other people, because you'd have to be fairly stone-faced not to enjoy this one, I think. And the final book I'm going to talk to you about, which is the final book I finished in May, as well as being my favourite, and that is James by Percival Everett. So this is the second Percival Everett book that I've read. The first one was The Trees, which I read last year, which I really, really enjoyed. And I've been looking forward to reading James, especially considering all of the acclaim that it's received. I mean, it's won the Pulitzer Prize this year. But I've been kind of putting it off for a while, because the story of James is a retelling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn from the perspective of the character Jim, who is the man who runs away from slavery at the beginning of the story and accompanies Huck through his adventures. I'd never read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, so I wanted to read that first. So I read that last month, and this month I read James. And I have to say, it is absolutely spectacular. I loved every single part of it. One of the things I was a bit concerned about this going into it was there were elements of the story of Huckleberry Finn, which quite frankly I thought weren't that good. But what I liked about this is that Percival Everett wasn't completely beholden to the plot of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. One of the things he did was he changed the section around the King and the Duke, these two con men who accompany Hook and Jim for part of their journey. And what he did with them is he made them into much more of a sinister threat, which was much more appropriate for the sort of things that they did and the sort of people that they were. The other thing he did, which I liked, which was worried about going in, was he kind of excised the whole section from the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn that involves Tom Sawyer, because quite frankly, if you've read the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, you'd probably agree that the story drops off a cliff as soon as Tom Sawyer shows up. And the most important thing that he did in this was he gave the character of James, much more agency in the story. He is much more the master of his own destiny. He is someone who is not just allowing the things and the events of the story of Huckleberry Finn wash over him and drag him along. He makes his own choices and decisions, which ultimately lead to the final resolution of the story in the way that the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn don't. I'm planning on doing a full video, doing a bit of a compare and the contrast between the two, so I don't want to talk about it too much more than this. Suffice to say, I absolutely love this book. 5-star read, no notes, highly recommended. So as far as what I'm going to be reading in June, I don't really do a TBR for the month because I've done them in the past and then I've completely ignored them and just read whatever the hell I wanted instead. But I've already started reading the If It Bleeds novella collection by Stephen King because I want to catch up on the Holly Gibney stories because I quite fancy reading the new one, Never Flinch. So I've got to read the novella If It Bleeds in that series, and I've also got to read the novel Holly as well before I get on to Never Flinch. Other than that, I did a video at the start of this year talking about all of the different series that I'd started to read but hadn't finished. So I want to try and make a bit of a dent into those as well. So I think I'm either going to read the second part of Margaret Atwood's Mad Adam series, which would be The Year of the Flood, or I'm going to read the third part of Joe Abercrombie's First Law trilogy, which is The Last Argument of Kings. Maybe I'll get to both of them. I don't know. As well as that, I'm planning on finishing off the Murderbot Diaries on audiobook as well. They're something that I'm digesting on my commute to work at the moment. So that's what I'm doing for things like sci-fi and thrillers and stuff like that. So on top of that, I also like to try and push myself with something like a classic or a piece of contemporary fiction as well. The things I'm kind of eyeing up this month are Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. I've never read that one. Either that or perhaps Prophet Song by Paul Lynch, which won the Booker Prize a couple of years ago and I haven't read. So I'll see how I get on. I will probably look back at this video at the end of June and realize that I've read none of the things that I said I was going to read. And the final thing I wanted to say was a massive thank you, because my channel over the last couple of days has now got over 1,000 subscribers. In fact, as I'm recording this now, it's got nearly 1,200 subscribers. Why the YouTube algorithm god decided to smile down on the video that makes me look kind of stupid because I found 10 books so hard, I don't know, but I'm very, very grateful for it, and I'm very, very glad that you're all here. I hope you continue to enjoy these videos, and I hope you continue to give me all the fantastic comments that you've been giving me as well. For those of you who are new to the channel, I started this channel just over a year ago to document the fact that I was rereading the entirety of Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. And since then it's evolved into a bit more of a general booktube channel, and last month I finished reading Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. So I'm still kind of finding my feet with where this channel is going to go, but I'm going to continue to try and do my weekly posts, and they'll probably be things like reviews, more lists of books, discussions about various different books and themes, and I'll probably have some more Discworld content in there as well. But I appreciate your patience while I'm still trying to find my feet with the channel. In the meantime, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch this and to subscribe to this channel. I really appreciate it. Take care.